Hi everybody, it's Charlie here, and this video is going to show you the recurve bow that Logan and I made. Came out really good. We're very happy with it. It's got a pretty strong draw, but just takes a little getting used to. And we actually built the majority of it the tail end of last year, but it got a little too cold to keep working in the shop. So we finished it off earlier this year, had some projects going on, but we just got many coats of polish on it, so it's ready to shoot. And we got quite a few arrows passed through it recently, and this video is going to show you a little bit about how we made it. So basically all started with my friend Sean giving me this bow box, which is basically like a giant easy bake oven. He had made himself a long bow quite a while ago, a couple of them, and he was moving and I had the space, so he just said, you know, take it and build a bow. And that was about 8 years ago, and it sat around until Logan said, you know what, Dad, let's build a bow. And that's all I needed to hear. I said, okay, let's do it. So basically what you're doing is, to sum it up, you're putting the bow together and you're putting it in a press with a bunch of epoxy, and then you put it inside this giant oven here. Those are 200-watt bulbs, and it gets hot enough to cook and harden the epoxy after a few hours of sitting in there. And that's how you get the basic form of your bow. So we start with a block of what they call action wood. And you can see we've got the center riser cut out from the middle already. The riser is the piece that you grip in your hand. But this is layered, many layers of colored wood. And here's a cross section of it right here. So you can see at the top you've got black, green, brown, black, green, brown, black, green, brown, over and over again, layered and layered. And that's actually going to be the camouflage pattern. And I'll show you what that means once we show you what it looks like sliced apart. There's the riser after it's shaped a little bit. So knowing that it's got all those layers of the different colored woods, as you start to cut into it and take your grinder and your sander to it, you expose all the different layers, and that's how you get this camouflage pattern. So if you take that same piece of wood, but instead of making the riser out of it, you're going to make limbs out of it, and you take a long piece like that and you cut it at a very thin 60-degree angle, and you make a very thin piece, you get this type of pattern. And that's how we make the limbs, is we get a nice cross cut of that stacked layer, but it's at such a steep angle it makes that camouflage type pattern. So this is the bow press, and this is what holds the pieces of the bow together while it's curing in the oven. There's a top and a bottom. It's all made of 4 sheets stacked together of plywood. You can see in the middle where the riser would go, and then the limbs get attached. And again, it gets layered up with epoxy and then bakes. Now Sean had a bow press already, but it was for a long bow. And Logan and I wanted to make a recurve, so we built the recurve press and the outline, and here we are lining it with some wood and then some fiberglass, so we'll have a nice smooth surface to contour the edge of the bow. So you can see in the back we have the top part of the bow along with the regular bottom part of the bow. Also, we have added some steel bars and bolts to help keep the 2 sides clamped together. And then once we have all of our limb laminations laid out in the order and the pattern that we want, with the center core and the outside clear fiberglass, then we mix up the epoxy and start spreading it on, and then we put it into the mold. And here you see we have it in the bow press ready to go. There's the bottom layer and there's the top layer right there, and it's ready to get sandwiched together in the press. Alright, so here it is in the press, all taped up and clamped together. And if you notice, there's also a fire hose in there. It's deflated right now, but what's going to happen is the fire hose will cover and seal up all the gaps that might be left in the mold. And it takes a lot of pressure to pump it up, so it really makes it nice and tight in there and holds all that laminate together. And that's what it looks like all pumped up. You can see the hose standing straight up from the pressure. And then it goes into the box, into the Easy Bake Oven. We cover it up with an old blanket just to keep the heat in. And when you're all done, you get this gooping, leaked out, hardened epoxy and a roughed out bow. And this will all be trimmed down to size. There's Logan marking it to where the ends get cut off. And here he is using the bandsaw, cutting the tips of the limbs off, cutting them to size. And depending on where you cut them can also affect the strength of the bow. And there it is out of the press with the epoxy all shaved off and sanded. There's still some masking tape around the outside to protect the limbs and the laminations and the fiberglass. And that's what it looks like when we start cutting into it. It's starting to take shape. It'll eventually look like that after a lot of sanding. Now here's some carbon fiber tabs that we added and epoxied on to the end of the bow to give it strength. That's where the string would be digging into the limbs if we didn't reinforce it. So we can use those same 200-watt bulbs from the oven to bake on the limb tips with the little carbon tips. That way, once the epoxy cooks, it becomes one seamless piece with the bow. And here's Logan sanding out the string grooves. This is where the string's going to be notched in and stay put. He really had all hands on for every single part of this bow making experience. We both had a really good time making it. We can't wait to make another one. There's the carbon fiber tips with the string groove notched in. And there's what the bow looks like with the masking tape pulled off. It still needs a lot of sanding and polishing. Here's the tillering stick. That's the stick that makes sure that the bow is shooting straight and it doesn't have any twists or bends in it. And there is the first draw on the newly made bow. The handle's not shaped or anything. It's still a big solid block, but we had to know what it felt like. And here's the finished bow. There's the limbs. Everything's all polished. There's about 20 layers of gun stock oil on there. And I guess you use the gun stock oil because it remains flexible. And there's our bow.